Welcome back. Today's tutorial continues what we covered last time when we had the MVC entertainment system. Today we'll talk about the controllers part of MVC. Again, MVC stands for Model View Controller, and this lesson we'll talk about controllers. You remember from our discussion last time, we had our user here who uses keyboards and mice and has a monitor to sit there and send commands to the controller. The controller receives the commands, interprets the input, and decides to contact the model over here to retrieve, I forgot the URL address, to retrieve the model, which typically goes to an SQL database, but it doesn't have to be, to retrieve data from a source. It then sends that source back to the controller. The controller may modify the model, it may not, it depends on what the controller is trying to do, and then sends the model to the view via HTML and other files to the browser, which then renders the screen back to the user. So the flow goes from the user to the controller, to the model, back to the controller, back to the view, and renders the results to the user. Notice that the view does not talk to the controller, nor does the view talk to the model. This, the controller, is the central nerve center of the MVC design pattern. So let's go to Visual Studio now, and let's see how we create an MVC application. So in MVC, we click on File, New, Project. We choose C#, we choose Web, we choose ASP.NET Web Application using the .NET framework. We give our application a name. In this case, we're going to create this is going to be our ITP 244. MVC is the name of our project. And we click OK. We then click on the MVC. It's already chosen for us. Notice it's clicked down here as well. Now we can click on the added unit test that's typically recommended. We will not do that in this course. But something for you to consider later on. Now, Visual Studio goes out there and creates a web application project for us. We'll get rid of this on our screen here. And if you notice on the right, under the solution of the project, we have our project name, and we have a series of folders. One is called Models. One is called Views. If you expand the views, you'll see there's some files in there. And the third is Controllers, which also has a file in there called Home Controller. Okay, so we have then created our application here. And if we click on the IIS Express over here, we will launch our website. And not bad looking, is it? For all we did, that's not bad at all. We have some menus up here, the name, some other stuff over here. All this was generated when we built our MVC application. All right, so what's the purpose of controllers? Now, if you saw before in our example in the previous tutorial, controllers respond to user input. They get model or data from the model, and they may make changes to that as well. Controllers in the MVC pattern control the flow of the application. Notice, if you remember, views don't talk to other views even. Views only take responses from the controller. So the controller is the traffic cop here that determines the flow of the application, uses user input, and provides data going to the relevant view. How do controllers work? We saw it before. A user sends a request via a URL, Uniform Resource Locator, or a web address, sends it to the controller. That request is then routed to an action or method in the controller. We'll look at that later on in this tutorial. So the request is routed to the action. The controller interprets the request, sends messages to the model to retrieve data, usually from a database, and selects a view, determines which view it will respond to or send the request to, and along with that, it sends the model to the view. So why do we start with controllers? Well, as you may or may not know, model, view, controller all interact together, and it's kind of hard to discuss one without the other. So we need all three of those components to understand any of this, and we got to start somewhere. We're going to start with controllers because controllers are the brains of this whole design pattern. They control the action here. Okay? All right. So if you look at in the code, if you look at the about action in the home controller. Now, remember we're looking at in the Visual Studio, under controllers, there's a controller called the home controller. All right, so we will open the home controller. We go to the about method, and we see this code here. viewbag.message equals your application description page. We're going to make a slight change here. We're going to say MVC is fun to work with. We're just changing this one line of code here to this line of code. And let's see what happens. So we go to Visual Studio, click on IIS Express, click on About, and there's our application. We saw that from before. Click on the About, and we see our message here that we changed in our code. MVC is fun to work with. All right, so somewhere this code had to be generated, and that would be in the view. I know this tutorial is about controllers, but as I said, all three of these work together. We're going to take just a quick peek at the view for the home about system. So we click on Views, Home, About, CSHM. We see this code here, and there's our message there, the view bag message that we rendered. That was where we sent the message, MVC is fun to work with, and the HTML, this is HTML here, this is not. These controls here are HTML, and I hope you looked at the W3 Schools tutorial on HTML before class started, which I'm sure you did. This should make sense to you what H2, H3, and P are. All right, so there's our view. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a student enrollment system in this course. Is what I will be doing to show you. So let's add a new controller. So we're going to right-click on controllers in Visual Studio. We're going to choose Add Controller, and we get this here. So we right-click on controllers. We click Add Controller. Again, this is the Solution Explorer in our Visual Studio. Right-click on controllers, Add Controller. Next pops up this screen here. We're going to choose MVC 5 Controller Empty. Yours may look slightly different. I have an extra option here, which you probably don't have. So just choose an MVC 5 Controller. And we're going to name it Student Controller. It comes out with default highlighted. We're going to rename default to Student. And then we click the Add button here. Now if we look at our Student Controller in Visual Studio, we'll see we have this new file here, Student Controller. If you open that file up, Student Controller, you will see this code here, among other code. But this is the meat of it. Here's the class Student Controller. Notice it inherits the controller class, and it has one method in here, and we call this an action because it returns an action. In this case, it returns a view. Okay, if you go look at the views while we're here, right click on, I'm sorry, not right click, left click on views, expand it, and you'll see we have a new folder called Student down here that was generated when we created our Student Controller up here. So it creates a corresponding view folder with the exact same name as our controller, minus the controller, of course, and we have Student. Also notice there are no files in here. It just created the folder for us. Okay, so now we're going to change our index method here slightly. So we're going to change action result to string. We're going to change return view to return a string, our wonderful students. And what this does is this returns pure native HTML to our browser. So in this case here, we don't even need a view. This will return a string, and there's the string there. Okay, so we change that to string, change return view to return our wonderful students. Now let's see what happens. So you right click on your project, and way down here at the bottom, can we right click the project, not the file, but project ITP 244 MVC. Down here at the bottom it says properties. We're going to click on that. That brings up a box here. We're going to click on web. It says click web. We're going to click web here. It says select specific page. We're going to select the specific page, and we're going to type in student. Remember, student was the name of our controller. So click on student, and then we click the IIS button to run it. And we see here's our web browser. There's our URL. This is running off a local machine. So it's running off a local host. And in the URL, all we have is student. Notice we don't put /index, although we could. Index, using the routing system, is the default action it will call if we don't give it any other action. So because we don't have that, it knows to run the index. The index returns the string, our wonderful students. So the index returns pure HTML. Now we could write a whole system using this. It would be a little laborious and tedious to do all of our HTML within the controller itself. That's why we have views to do that for us, so we don't have to. But I want to show you today how the controller works. We call the controller action here. All it did was return the string on one of our students, and our browser rendered it. Okay, so let's Let's do this in real life now. Just show you the pieces. Let's do it in real life. So again, we're going to right-click on controllers. We're going to add controller. We're going to choose MVC 5 controller, empty. We're going to click add. We're going to change the default from default to student. We're going to click add again. Now this is going to spin around for a little bit and add the controller for us. There's our code. Let's make the window a little wider so we can see the code. Notice over here we have a file called Student Controllers, which is added under Controllers. And under View we have a folder called Student. Now we're going to change our index. Then when we want to change this, instead of returning a view, to return a string, we do string. We replace view with our wonderful students as a string. That's it. And that's all we do. Oh yeah, we got to go down here. I'm sorry, I'm going to go down here off the screen. I'm going to change my properties to web specific page. We will start with the student. We can close that. If we click on the IIS button up here, Express, it will run our page for us. And there we see our wonderful screen with our wonderful students. Okay? So I just did what we talked about a little bit ago, put it all into one short little video here so we can see how that works. All right. So let's add another action to our controllers here, to our student controller. We're going to add one for details. So I'm going to take this code here, add it to my controller, create a new method called details. It takes an ID of an integer. Now the ID is a commonly used variable name in MVC. I know it's not descriptive, but use it because your routers are looking for ID numbers. So all we're going to do is return a string that says student ID and pass it whatever ID number we get. Let's run this and see what happens. Notice in my URL here that we have student/details/101, where 101 is my ID number, and that then is passed into my browser as student ID 101. Okay? So integers are easy to work with, strings not so much. When you have a string as an input, you can have what's called injection, and people can put nasty stuff in your code. So with this, we're going to create a method called browse. We're going to pass it a string name, and we're going to use this static class here called HTTP utility. It has a method called HTML encode that will examine whatever we pass it here and tell us if this code looks suspicious or not. If it's suspicious, it will throw an exception. So if it's not suspicious, it passes it to here, and we then have student and then whatever name they put in there. Let's take a look at that. We'll run this code. So here we have browse. I have name, question mark name equal Bob, and it displays Bob here. We just encoded the name, said this looks harmless, create a variable, pass the variable to the browser, to the view, to the browser here, as student Bob. All right, so let's take a look at if someone were to take our same browser here, we had name equal Bob before, and they put this code in here and basically says, relocate to this evil website and make a little JavaScript file out of it that HTML encode will capture that and throws an exception that says a potentially dangerous request query string value was detected, and it shows the script Windows location. All this is that. All right, so we see where we can capture code, make sure people don't put nasty stuff in URL messages that we inadvertently process. That's a good habit to follow. All right, let's take a look at how this is going to work. We're going to do this again. I'm using a little different browser here. Hold on a minute. Let me turn that off. Let's click play. Oops. How come that won't play? What am I doing wrong? Well, darn. Okay. Got a little glitch here. Anyway, that was doing the same code we had just done. I'm not sure why it didn't work, but it didn't. So here we go. Here we click on transcript, which we wrote. We didn't write it. Oh, why won't that work? All right, well, that didn't work. Okay, anyway, that is how controllers work. It's hard to see from here. We'll spend a lot more time modifying our controller code. I want you to see how that kind of give an overview of what controllers are. Again, like I said, as I said in this course, we will spend much more time working with controllers. I hope that was helpful to you. And stay tuned. We'll have more tutorials coming up later. Take care.